Hello and welcome to How to Conquer the Self-Edit. And I say conquer because we're not going to tap self-editing politely on the shoulder and ask if we can take over. We're just going to go for it. We're going to do it. In case you don't know who I am Amanda Shofner. I am an author. I have 2 fiction books out, and I have 2 nonfiction books out. And I'm a writing coach, so I help people write their books, and I help people edit their books. And I am a self-editing survivor. And I will show you how you can survive self-editing too, because it's possible. You can do it. I am also a delete key lover, and this is pulled over from my editing days. I think we often write too much, and so I like the delete key. I also have a fun little story about deleting stuff later. If you are on Twitter, you can hashtag your takeaways with least revision. If you are on the Google Plus page with me, I have the question and answer app open so you can ask your questions as you have them. There is a slight time delay. I think it's about 30 seconds to a minute. So don't wait to ask your question. Just ask it. I will get to it. I would hate for it to be the end of the webinar and then you have a question and I sign off and it doesn't get answered. That would be terrible. So get your question in. I will be here. I will answer. Here we go. Before we get started, there is like one tweak you need. It's more a mind tweak than anything. It's a mind adjustment. And I think what you'll find out is a lot of the issues that come from self-editing are all up in your head. It's all up in your head. So one thing, I've been doing a lot of writing and stuff, and when I refer to the writing process, editing is included in that for me. So editing is a part of the writing process. It's not when you hit the end you are done and then you have to begin editing. No, it's all part of the same process. So, writing is only one step of the entire process, and it's really not over until you hit publish. So when you hit the end on that first draft, you're like one fourth of the way there. You're only partly there. So if you go into the whole writing and editing process realizing that this self-editing part is really just one more component of publishing, you may hate it less. You may hate it less. And just a reminder, I do have the question and answer app open. If you're on the Google Plus page, it's right on the right side. So if you have questions, if you want to add anything, let me know. I am here. I am listening. I will answer your questions. Next up is, when do you self-edit? And obviously you say, yes, I'm going to edit after I finish the first draft, but in reality that's not where you stop, because you will have all these other people helping you create a better story, and after every round of edits or every round of feedback, you have to edit more. So your job is never really done editing until you hit publish. So you edit after your first draft. You edit after you get feedback from your alpha reader, if you have an alpha reader. Not everyone does. You have to edit after you get feedback from your beta readers. You edit after you get feedback from your content editor, if you have a content editor. Right? You have to edit after your copy editor and proofreader. And you know, by the time you reach the copy editor and proofreader, you aren't editing the same kinds of things in your manuscript, but you're still editing. So your self-edit never really stops until you hit publish. It's a continuous process. Now I want to talk about what self-editing is and what it isn't. So self-editing is a way to make your book better. That is really ultimately the goal, not just of self-editing, but every stage of the editing is just to make your book better. It is your chance to fix anything from previous drafts. It is not just checking for grammar and typos. That's a big no-no. There's so much more that goes into self-editing than checking for grammar and typos. So you're not reading it through once and calling it good. Right? You are really in charge of every single type of editing out there before you hand it off to someone else. You are going to want to look at, say, the dialogue and making sure that it sounds like actual dialogue, something that people would say. You want to look at the characters and make sure that your characters sound differently and that they're well developed. You want to make sure you don't have any plot holes or random plot threads. You want to check your pace. You want to check the actual flow of the sentences and the clarity and making sure that you make sense. So you're not going to be able to evaluate all those things in one pass. It's impossible. No one can do it. No one. So you have to read through it more than once. And self-editing is not a way to judge how good or bad at writing you are. And I think a lot of times when we have to edit something, we feel like we've somehow failed or we're not very good because we need work. And that's not what self-editing is. It's just to make it better. Not perfect, just better. Just better. Staying on the whole approach, how you approach editing, we'll talk about the editing mindset. And I think it's really important to go into the editing process assuming your book is crap. Not because it is crap, but because you have to go into it looking for issues to solve. And if you go into editing thinking that your story or your book is perfect just the way that it is, you are not going to see those mistakes and you're going to be less willing to listen to other people when they say there's an issue. So if you go into it assuming that there are issues that you need to fix, it'll just be a much smoother process. And you also want to seek to make it better, not perfect. Now, I already said that you're going to go through multiple passes. You know, you're looking for very specific things. You're not just going to read it through once. And so with each draft, you're just making it better. You're making it better than the last. You don't have to make it perfect. And when we try to make it perfect, that's when we get hung up on, you know, finding that perfect word, and then we're spending 15 minutes trying to find the perfect word for that one sentence, and then we get really frustrated. It's really frustrating then when we try to make it perfect. And so all you have to do is make it better. And you want to get comfortable with the delete key. Like, your words aren't you. If you delete your words, you're not deleting a part of yourself. And I think this is really difficult, especially if we feel like our book is perfect the way that it is and we can't think of anything to change. But it's just not true. You have to kind of force yourself away. You have to distance yourself from your own writing. And I know that I went through this myself with Elusive Memories, which is my full-length novel that I put out. I actually had to delete about 7,000 to 8,000 words from the ending of my book, and it was really difficult to hit that delete key, even though I love it. It was hard to say goodbye to 7,000 or 8,000 words, but when you go into editing, it's all about making your story better. And if deleting 10,000 words of your manuscript is going to make it better, do it. It's not you. You're not deleting part of yourself. Just do it, make it better. The last one is you are the author, for better and worse. So there's a good side to this and there's a bad side to this, right? The bad side to this is that you don't listen to anyone because you know your story best. And that kind of goes back to the assuming your book is crap and just being open to suggestions. So you have to remember that. But the good thing about this too is that as the author, you really know what your story is, and so you have the ability to say, no, this suggestion doesn't work for my story. I think I had this, I did this with my own story. I had someone tell me that I should delete like a sentence or a piece of it because it didn't fit, but what they didn't realize was that single piece played a really big role later on in the story, and so if I deleted it, then that was going to be really bad. So you are the author. You have the power to accept and reject. And so you don't have to pay attention. You don't have to take every single piece of advice that you get, and I think that can make editing a little bit easier, especially when you get into the self-editing part after you get feedback from, you know, your alpha reader and your beta readers and your content editor. Okay, let's talk about actual tips and tricks that you can do in your own self-editing. So now that you have hit the end, you have written the words the end, and you are ready to self-edit. The first thing that you want to do, leave your manuscript alone. Walk away from it. Because when you hit the end, you are so self-involved with your story or your book that you have no objectivity whatsoever. You have none. And you are not going to be a very good editor at this point. So you need to walk away. You can, you know, walk away, write something else, go read a whole bunch of books. It doesn't matter. The idea is to basically forget what you wrote so that when you come back to it, you have fresh eyes. You kind of want to forget what you meant to say so that you can see it as it is actually written, and that's kind of key. Once you come back to your manuscript, I think it's important to create a needs to be fixed list, and this comes into play later on when you want to decide when you're finished or not. But once you've finished, you may have kind of kept this list in your head as you wrote. You may know already what needs to be fixed. If not, you want to do a quick read-through to see your book as a whole. Because when we write, you know, it takes you a long time to write, and so when you get to the end, you maybe don't remember what happened at the beginning and how it all fits together. So you want to take at least one read-through and just read it as a whole and take note of items that need to be fixed. And this can be like, I had something like I had to change a character's age. I added some characters in. Maybe I wanted to make sure that a character just tweak their behavior a little bit so that in certain places they weren't so annoying. It can be whatever you notice. I mean, you are the author and you are going to feel in your gut what maybe isn't working for you, and those are going to go on your needs to be fixed list. Another really super important tip is to break your edits into manageable chunks. So if you end up with this huge book, say it's 200 pages, if you sit down and say, okay, I have to edit this 200-page document, that's a lot, that's daunting, and you're gonna get frustrated and give up. It's much easier if you look at it from the perspective of, say, I'm going to edit 5 pages today. Or you could edit 1 chapter. Or maybe you're going to edit for 30 minutes. How you break that into chunks doesn't matter as long as you really make it so that it doesn't seem like it's this huge project. So I would break things down by pages because pages just worked better for me, and I would do 10 pages a day. And that was a lot easier for me, and it gave me a way to track my progress. And so rather than feeling like I only got 10 of 200, I got my 10 pages for the day, and then I could move on the next day and get another 10 pages and get another 10 pages. And that kind of kept my spirit up and kept me engaged and going in editing rather than feeling like the 200 pages were just looming over me. One thing you can do when you edit is outline your book as it's written, and this helps whether you created an outline before you started or not. And so if you're doing fiction, this gives you a really good look at your plot and what happens, and you can kind of ask yourself if that's, you know, what you wanted it to do. If you're writing nonfiction, outlining your book gives you a good chance of you know, organizing your thoughts and making sure that all the pieces fit together in the right way. You may find that certain sections maybe belong in different chapters or something. So outlining your book as it's written is a good way of doing that. The other important thing is to print it off. And the reason I say print it off, not just so that you can hold it and you know, kind of enjoy that moment of I wrote this, which is also really important, but when you print it off and you read it, it's in a different format, and so your brain processes it in a different way. And when you see it differently, you're going to catch more mistakes. And that's why you print it off, and that can be really useful. It's also nice to like flip through it rather than scroll. And the other thing is to make multiple passes. And I've already kind of talked about this, and I'm talking about it again because it's that important. And you're not just reading it once, checking for grammar and typos, and calling it done. You are looking at very specific aspects of your story. You're looking at the dialogue. You are looking at character development, right? Those are all content pieces. And then after you do content, and I would suggest doing content first, you can focus on the copy editing part when you're looking at sentence clarity. And you really have to take charge and do all of that. You can't skimp on this part of it. Make multiple passes, pay attention to both copy and content. Because your editors and your betas and anyone who reads your book can only take your book and raise the quality. It can't take it from crap or not very good to ultra awesome in one draft. So you have to take charge of your own edits. You have to make sure that you get as much as you possibly can in this self-edit, because you don't want to depend on on someone else to catch something, because it may not happen. I had actually gone through an entire round of beta edits, and I was finishing up all my edits on that feedback, and I realized there was a moment in my novel where the time of day changes from midnight, in the middle of the night, to the middle of the day in the space of about 15 minutes, and people miss that. So you really want to make sure that you are making multiple passes and focusing on very specific items when you do that, because your brain can't process everything at once. The other thing I would say is to track changes, and this is something that you can do in Word, and the reason that I suggest this is because the change that you make may not actually benefit your story. You may read it again and realize that no, your original was right, and you always want to revert. You want to be able to revert back to track changes, or to the original. And the other thing is to read it out loud. And this kind of goes back to like printing it off, and I would suggest doing this no matter how weird you feel about it, just because you can hear so many mistakes that you would have never caught otherwise. And so if you're making multiple passes, you are reading your story over and over and over and over and over again, and it's so familiar to you, not just because you've read it so many times, but because you wrote it. And your brain is going to start taking a break from all these passes. And when you read it out loud, you will catch so many more mistakes, not just content stuff, but copy stuff, sentences that don't make sense, typos, that sort of thing. And so reading it out loud can be extremely helpful. All right, we have a question from Kimberly. At what point would you add entire scenes you realize are needed, as opposed to tweaks to existing material? I would add entire scenes as soon as you can. I probably wouldn't do it while I was writing the very first draft. But if I knew that it needed to be done, I would do it as soon as possible, because you're going to want to see those scenes and how it fits into your whole story as soon as possible in the process, if that makes sense. If you want me to follow up, let me know. All right, so we have, once you've done all the self-edits, and there are multiple times that you're probably going to pass it off, but part of the reason why I say it's important to have this needs to be fixed list is that once you've addressed every item on that list, then you know you're ready to move on to the next stage of editing, because you've done everything that you can. And then another thing is when you've tackled both content and copy issues, and even if you move on past the beta readers who really will focus on content, you may still find yourself doing content stuff at the copy editing stage, just because I think it's the continual process. And then anytime you find yourself poking at your manuscript thinking, what the hell did I just write? And you feel like you make it's just nonsense, you have no idea what you're doing, right? That's a time where you are so involved in what you're doing that you have to take a step back. And that usually means you've done everything you possibly can, and it's time to move on. And after you've written your first draft, you would then hand it to your beta readers. If you have gotten feedback from your betas and you've gone through all those needs to be fixed items and you're back to poking your manuscript and thinking, what the hell did I write? I don't even think this makes sense. then you're going to pass it on to your content editor, or if you don't have a content editor, you might want to find new betas. I call them gamma readers, and just complete that process. Yes, complete the process. You know, you have beta readers, content editor, you have copy editor, proofreader. That's pretty much how it goes. All right. That is how you conquer self-editing. If you have any questions, be sure to drop them in the question and answer box while I kind of wait for questions, if there are any. I want to talk about building self-awareness, because I think that part of the reason we have issues with self-editing is that we get stuck with something and then we stop because we're frustrated and we never figure out why. And part of self-editing is really learning what your own hang-ups are and what stops you from moving forward. So anytime you get stuck, anytime you find yourself staring at the screen for, you know, minutes, 15 minutes, whatever, or maybe you start playing something on your phone or you're on social media when you should be editing, that's a sign that something isn't working, and you really have to kind of dive into why it's not working for you. Is it because you're focused on finding the perfect word or the perfect sentence? Is it because you're frustrated with a scene and you don't really know what to do and you feel like you can't move on? Those are all things that stop us from self-editing, and that's kind of where people give up, or they don't know how to incorporate feedback. So anytime you feel yourself just pulling back and hating the self-editing and not feeling like you're making progress, ask yourself why. And when you build in that self-awareness, you are going to get better at self-editing, because you are going to learn your own blocks. And when you can bust through those blocks, you're going to conquer self-editing. All right. So if you like this webinar, I have another one coming up, and it is called How to Get Started Writing Your Book. Obviously, if you are at the self-editing stage, maybe you're a little bit beyond this, but I know there are a lot of people who say, I want to write a book, and it never happens. So if you think you might benefit from this, or if you know someone who might benefit from this, this happens on August 12th. And it is just how to get started. You can find this at thepathofleastrevision.com/startwriting. And if you want to join me writing, I do have the writing sidekick going on. That happens in July. You can find that at thewritingsidekick.com. And if I have anyone from the Writing Sidekick on this call right now, on this webinar with me, we will do a writing sprint later on, and we will rock out our words, because part of getting your book written or even getting self-editing finished is devoting time to actually doing, to plan to edit, to plan to write. That's how it happens. That's what we do with the Writing Sidekick. So if there are no more questions, I'm going to sign off for the night. Thank you for joining me, and go out and conquer your own self-edits.